In times when Mr. Harvey was too ill to record his broadcasts, he turned the reins over to the only person he trusted to fill in for him on the rest of the story, which was the author of the series, his son, Paul Harvey Arant, Jr. Here is one of those broadcasts.
Now, the rest of the story. Behold, a man. His dying wife has left him. He's sitting in an upper-floor apartment, his head in his hands, the cries of 2 infant children searing his soul. He is otherwise utterly alone. Pushing 50 and professionally preoccupied, he cannot care for his young son and daughter by himself. He can scarcely attend to his own needs. He is, in a word, desperate. And if any one attribute could generally account for his predicament, it would be that he, all his life, has been unlucky in love. And it's odd because Al was what we used to call a good catch. First of all, he was handsome. He had a powerful physique, a jutting chin, dramatic eyebrows, and a sweeping handlebar mustache, which was quite fashionable in his day. He also had an important government job and an impressive uniform to go with it, so Al could have had just about any girl he wanted, and, in fact, he did. But despite his eligibility and the number of women who so vigorously sought to put it out of its misery, Al just could not seem to find romantic happiness for long. The problem was not impatience to commit himself. Al was 36 before marrying for the first time, and then it was to an experienced, stable woman, a widow considerably older than he. She, Anna, did, however, contract tuberculosis, and when she became an invalid, Al began searching elsewhere for comfort. And he didn't have far to look. One of his numerous affairs, more serious than the rest, was a waitress named Fanny who worked in the same inn where Al and Anna lived. You talk about a mixed-up mess of a man. Meanwhile, Al attempted to provide full-time care for his ailing wife by summoning his teenage niece, Clara, to come live with them. But the indiscretions of her husband became too much for Anna, and so after 7 years of marriage, she sued for a legal separation. That left the way somewhat clearer for Al and Fanny, who set up house and began having children. They married officially 3 years later when Anna died, but guess what? Within a few months, Fanny came down with tuberculosis and was sent away to recuperate. She would live only a few months more. Al, you see, was unlucky in love, as were the women who loved him. And illness aside, the misfortune was mostly of his own design. But this, Al determined, must change. With 2 motherless babies to nurture, he must reorder his life, must find a responsible woman to look after them, preferably a wife. And this time would be different, the middle-aged Austrian customs inspector promised himself. This time he would issue something lasting and something of value from his heretofore disheveled existence. This time, he vowed, his luck would change. So Al once again summoned his young niece, Clara, to his side. And eventually he proposed to her and married her. And together they gave each other and the world a child named Adolf Hitler. Unlucky in love? Oh, yes. Only now you know the rest of the story.
And now, the rest of the story. Alois Schicklgruber, Hitler's father, was born out of wedlock in 1837. His mother, Adolf's grandmother, was Maria Schicklgruber. The true identity of Alois's, we'll call him Al as Mr. Harvey did, the true identity of Al's biological father remains a mystery. At Al's baptism, the priest wrote illegitimate on the baptismal certificate where it asked for his father's name. Maria knew but refused to give the name of the baby's father. At the time, as many as 40% of all children in the region were listed as illegitimate. In 1842, when Al was 5 years old, Maria married Johann Georg Hiedler, spelled Hiedler. Maria died in 1847 and Johann died 10 years later. In 1876, with the help of Johann's brother and 2 other relatives, Al convinced the Austrian government that his biological father was his deceased stepfather, Johann Georg Hiedler. It was common for illegitimate children to become legitimized as adults to remove the stigma associated with being illegitimate. Now, during the legal name change process, Austrian authorities misspelled the last name Hiedler as Hitler, the name we are all familiar with. Some historians argue that Johann was, in fact, Al's biological father. In 1876, Johann's brother declared before a notary that Johann Georg Hiedler was Al's biological father. He explained that Johann was living in extreme poverty and was unable to care for Maria and Al. The space for the father's name on the baptismal certificate was altered from illegitimate to Johann Georg Hitler, Hitler. Other historians claim that Al's biological father was Johann's brother, the one who helped Al convince authorities that Johann was Al's father. There were some who claimed that Al's biological father was a Jewish man named Leopold Frankenberger, but most discount this theory. In the early 1930s, to prove his unblemished Aryan pedigree, Hitler ordered the SS to investigate his ancestry. And of course, they found no evidence of Jewish ancestry, as you would imagine. But most modern historians agreed with the findings of the SS. When Al became legitimized in 1876, 13 years before Hitler was born, there was no way he could have known that his becoming legitimized would help secure Hitler's status as Aryan. With the legal name change, Clara became Al's first cousin once removed. In the same year that Al became legitimized, 1876, while he was still married to Anna, Al began an affair with Clara. Anna died in 1883. In that same year, Al married Franziska Matzelsberger. His affair with Clara continued. Franziska died in 1884. Al and Clara married in January of 1885. Just 4 months after Al and Clara's marriage, their first son, Gustav, was born. In 1886, they had a daughter they named Ida. But Gustav and Ida both died of diphtheria during the winter of 1887-1888. Their third child, Otto, was born, but died in 1887. Adolf was born in 1889. In 1894, they had a son they named Edmund. He died at the young age of 6. In 1896, they had a daughter named Paula. Of Al and Clara's 6 children, only Adolf and Paula lived to adulthood. In January of 1903, Al went to a nearby inn to have his usual morning glass of wine. An employee offered Al a newspaper, and Al collapsed. He was taken to an adjoining room where he later died. Clara died in 1907 from an experimental form of chemotherapy to treat her breast cancer. Dr. Edward Bloch did his best to save Clara's life. When Hitler came to power decades later, he showed gratitude to Dr. Bloch, who was a Jew. After Dr. Bloch was forced to close his medical practice in 1938, he wrote a letter to Hitler asking for help. Hitler put Dr. Bloch under special protection by the Gestapo. Dr. Bloch and his wife stayed in their home undisturbed while they awaited their immigration papers. Surprisingly, in 1940, Hitler allowed Dr. Bloch and his wife to immigrate to the United States. Dr. Bloch was interviewed in 1941 and again in 1943 by the Office of Strategic Services, which became the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. During those interviews, Dr. Bloch said, "While Hitler was not a mother's boy in the usual sense, I never witnessed a closer attachment." Their love had been mutual. Clara Hitler adored her son. She allowed him his own way whenever possible. For example, she admired his watercolor paintings and drawings and supported his artistic ambitions in opposition to his father, at what cost to herself one may guess. Dr. Bloch said Hitler was the saddest man I had ever seen when he learned that his mother would die. Clara was a pious and kind woman who, according to Dr. Bloch, would turn in her grave if she knew what became of him. Oh, what a tangled web we weave. I'm Brad Dison. Thanks for watching. And as Paul Harvey would say, good day.